Hi, I'm Charlotte and this is Tired Mama Tries to Read. So I'm doing a little review video of 3 books that I've managed to finish in the last few weeks. Really been a rough few weeks for reading. Just anything you can think of that could have happened has happened, and it's not left me with a lot of time, and then the time I have had I've not been in the right place. So I have obviously managed to read something. It's just not I've not enjoyed reading, actually, which is, I don't think it's all the fault of the books. I think it's just partly the mindset. So anyway, I'll go straight to the one that is the most confusing, The Female Persuasion by Meg Wolitzer. I'd never read any Meg Wolitzer, but since I'm reading this book, I have looked it up, and I feel like some of the things I felt about the book have been reflected in other people's reviews, not just of this book, but of other books she's written. So this follows the life of Greer Kadetsky, who's a young girl who she's kind of lost, and she's not very likable. So that's the main problem I had with the book, is that she's a difficult character to like. She goes to university, she becomes politicised and ends up becoming a feminist, following Faith Frank, who's meant to be this famous feminist that's been created for the purposes of the book. Yeah, lots of problems with it. Partly it's just that I didn't like a lot of the characters. I didn't really like Faith Frank that much, although later in the book you see into her history and you kind of feel a little bit more sympathy towards her. But I've read another review where it says it's too little too late, and I agree. I never liked Greer. She's really annoying, and she's not very nice, and she's not a particularly brilliant feminist. But I know it sounds crazy, but the writing is so amazing, it just makes you plough through. So even though halfway through I was really tempted to stop, just the power of the writing was what compelled me. And then also, thankfully, Corey, who is the character of he's Greer's boyfriend, his story becomes incredible halfway through, and I read it for him, really, and actually loads of reviews have backed me up. I felt like I wasn't interpreting the book correctly, or that maybe my state of mind of being in not a brilliant place was reflecting upon the book. You know, sometimes you feel like you're the one who's bringing something negative to a book and not the book itself. But I kind of feel validated by the reviews I've read. So there are some incredible bits of writing, and I actually really I'd encourage this for a book group. It would be awesome, or a buddy read, because I've longed to talk to someone about the problems I had with it. But there's amazing little bits, really, really simple. They sound so silly when you pick them out, but when you're in the sort of flow of the narrative, they're awesome. So this bit. The summits are about ambitious topics, such as recently leadership. Leadership being something that everyone now wanted, as if the world could be made up entirely of leaders and no followers, the way children might crave an all-fireman, all-ballerina society. It's that kind of thing where you just can't believe that she's put these two things together. Yeah, and just really simple parts of the narrative that don't need embellishment. She does it in this way that it's really poetic. Or she'll just go into a paragraph and describe a feeling, especially the bits where she's talking about young love. You're just like, yeah, okay. So many parts of the book I was like, okay, this is going to be the book of my life, you know. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to live with it forever, a bit like The Women's Room. But then the actual plot and the characters, weirdly, then just kind of ruined it. So, yeah, mixed feelings, but really glad I ploughed on and finished it. Then I read Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. So I'm trying to go fiction, non-fiction, fiction, non-fiction still, and it seems to be working out for me. So this is a book about Matt Haig's thoughts on the anxiety-ridden world that we live in. I found it really relevant to myself. The early chapters about news reports, about the intensity of mass media, and the fact that you've got, everywhere you turn, you've got so many outlets just pouring news at you, and it's all negative. I also found his chapters on social media really, really interesting. I completely agree with all of them. I did skip later chapters on things like work, because I have an awesome job and I'm not stressed in work at all, mostly because I don't work full time and I have zero ambition to have a career currently. So I'm in a really fortunate position where we're just happy to live at the level we're living. We don't have many high aims in my household, apart from just day-to-day happiness. So I didn't feel that was relevant to me. but it may be in the future, and it probably is super relevant to loads of people out there. It would have been much more relevant to me in my 20s when I was living alone, supporting myself, really felt sort of scared for the future and was like, I need to buy a house and I need to get a better job when I finished university. Of course, you know, none of that happened. So yeah, I think he sort of basically says, you know, you need to get out of the idea that work is the be all and end all and that tomorrow will be better and next year will be better. I only found those not relevant because I'm already in that place. I've spent the last 2 years riddled with anxiety, coming to terms with the fact that you've got to live in the moment, and that actually, whilst all of those things, it's really lucky that I live in a country in a position where I can just not worry about that kind of stuff, because I'm, you know, I'm living a perfectly brilliant life without, you know, a bigger house, a bigger car, whatever. It did take my brain a good couple of years to get my head around the fact of I want to live now. I'd already come to that conclusion, so I did kind of skip the second part of the book. But it's super relevant, I think, to anyone who's got anxiety or depression, anyone who just feels overwhelmed by the world. I definitely agree. And there's some just really, really cool bits. So the bits about books really struck with me. So an excess of everything. There are a lot of books. You have, for whatever reason, chosen to read this one, for which I sincerely thank you. But while you are reading this book, you might also be painfully aware that you aren't reading other books. See around me. And I don't want to stress you out too much, but there are a lot of other books. So basically, he says in here that, yeah, we can only read one book. We have multiplied everything, but we are still individual selves. There's only one of us. So he says we need to live on a human scale to focus on the few things we can do rather than the millions of things we can't. I completely agree. So yeah, one book at a time. Never going to read them all. That bit I did relate to. The third book I read was The End We Start From, and that's by Megan Hunter. And it's a sort of dystopian tale of a woman giving birth just as an environmental disaster occurs in London, and by all accounts the whole of the south of Britain are completely flooded. It's very sparsely written. It's in these little segments. Came as no surprise to me to find out she was a poet. Yeah, I read it in about an hour last night. It was a really quick read, but it was just enormous. It was enormous in its scope, and I kind of felt like it was a metaphor for motherhood in some ways. So there's the larger scale where you could read it as genuinely, an apocalyptic tale, and it's haunting in that way, and also hopeful. But I also found that it was a lot like the ideas of motherhood. I felt like the idea of using water, the flood that she chose to use as her possibly her metaphor, and the fact that she's breastfeeding this child all through what's going on. I could absolutely relate to it if it was intended that way. So the idea of being overwhelmed, of not knowing your future, of losing the life you had. So I'm sure people have written about this. I'm definitely not the only one who spotted that connection. But as I was reading it, just the passages on her relationship with her son and the love she feels and the disconnection from her partner have definitely it's got to be a metaphor. I'm sure it is. So I loved it. I really, really feel passionately about how much I loved it, and I would recommend it to anybody, but especially if you're a parent and overwhelmed, and possibly extra especially if you're breastfeeding, just because there's that added strain on you as an individual. There's no one who can share the burden of breastfeeding, so it's not to disparage bottle feeding at all. Parenthood is overwhelming regardless, but definitely there's a unique perspective to breastfeeding that's captured in this book. So I've done those three. My next read is going to be my Leonora Carrington, and I'm going to read this thinking of my Nana who passed away this week, because this is the sort of book she would have loved. I used to buy her a book every Christmas, and she would really, really ensure that I dedicated them in the front so that she would remember who they were from. So I'm actually going to get some of those books back. My lovely mum is bringing them back for me, so that'll be really nice. But I'm going to read this. My nan was a brilliant artist, and yeah, she would have totally loved The Life of Leonora Carrington. So I'm going to read that thinking of her, and I will get back to you when I've read this and a few others. So I hope you're having a lovely weekend, and I'll see you soon.